Geoffrey Blainey, thank you so much for your time. To see people tearing down statues of people who made money in the slave trade, is that understandable?
Well, I thought it was rather sad to see the mob take the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol and presumably carry it to the water's edge and tip it over. But the first thing, it's a work of art, isn't it? You should think twice about doing that. Then perhaps you go to the art gallery and you see somebody whose politics of long ago you don't like and you cut off his nose. I mean, it's endless, isn't it? The campaigns you could run if you decide that one aspect of a person's character cancels out all the other aspects.
Well, I think that's probably right. It's the demand for purity which I find really interesting. I mean, of course, you know, slave trade is one extreme, I guess. Can you tell me, Geoffrey, right, they're tearing down statues of people they don't like who they say own slaves, and they've got a list of people they want their statues taken down too, because they were racist or whatever, even William Gladstone, believe it or not. But can you tell me why they're so demanding of that, but they leave intact, they don't have on their list of statues to be removed, the one in Highgate Cemetery of Karl Marx?
Well, I suppose somebody will try one day to attack Karl Marx's face. History changes. People rise and fall in public esteem, and somebody who was a hero 200 years ago may not be a hero today, and the other way around. We only learn from history if we see it in all its diversity. We learn that people who seem to be so bad also had a good side. History is full of complexities, and I don't like the idea of a mob deciding what should be done to the statue or to the portrait of somebody. If it were a Parliament that debated it and made the decision, but why should it be the decision of a mob?
Well, there's that too, and I think also the erasing of history by, you know, every time you history takes a turn and you don't like what was done in the past, it leaves you with not much history at all to learn from. And this idea that you can have purity, which I think is a very deceitful and dangerous proposition. We've seen attacks here on statues of James Cook. An organiser of the Black Lives Matter protest in Adelaide wants a statue removed that honours former Premier Charles Cameron Kingston, even though he gave the vote to women. I mean, do you understand this mentality?
Well, I've not been to Adelaide lately. I assume these were radicals who decided that Charles Cameron Kingston should go. If they were radicals, they should realise that he was one of the most successful radical politicians in the history of South Australia. These decisions that somebody should be banned or their statue should be destroyed, they seem to be made on the basis of very little knowledge from time to time. It just seems to be wrong to destroy works of art, but also to see people as just one-sided rather than to see them as human beings with all their frailties and all their glories.
Yes, another statue on the hit list is that of Sir Robert Peel, because he invented the police force. Looking at all this in the broad, Geoffrey Blainey, are you in despair a bit about this contempt for Western civilization, this contempt for the past, this absolutist Puritan sort of search for absolute perfection, you know, and hostility to anything that isn't perfect, of the kind that had, you know, Puritans 400 years ago smashing up churches and statues back then as well? There seems to me a great uprising of ignorance and hostility to the very things, good and bad, that actually helped create Western society.
Yes, there is. There's something very one-sided about many of these crusades. I looked at a lot of television on Saturday and Sunday to see the protest movements in Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide, and the first thing that surprised me was that while people are entitled to feel indignant about many aspects of Australian history and from time to time the treatment of the Aborigines, I didn't hear one commentator or one speaker at any of those marches say, when they were speaking about Aboriginal deaths in custody, the first thing you have to say is that far more white people died in prisons than Aboriginal people died in prisons by a very big margin. That's down in all the latest historical research, and that should have been said by somebody. The next thing you say is that there are large numbers of Aboriginals in prison out of all proportion to their population, and too many of them have died. But the latest statistics show that in the last 25 years, the death rate of a white person in an Australian prison is higher than the death rate of Aborigines. You have to give both sides of that story, and that wasn't visible in one of the important events in Australia this year.
Well, I think there seems to be, that betrays to me an agenda here. And really, the constant attacks on the West, I mean, it's like what you do to a child. If you only pick out their flaws, you will stunt their growth, and you will you won't see the good in people as well. I think there's only so much that the Western society can put up with of that kind of one-sidedness before it collapses for lack of will to live, I think. Geoffrey Blainey, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks very much.